Martha, 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 you are worried and distracted by many things. Martha, Martha, Martha. As many of you know, I'm just back from General Convention. The first week was here on Zoom meetings, and we passed 498 resolutions and things, so that required homework. It's usually a 12-day project, and they shrunk it to 4 ideally due to COVID. Just a whole other conversation. So it was a moving and fascinating adventure. So the first week was all online. The second week we were in person. It's the bicameral body, which was fashioned actually after our Congress. There is a House of Deputies and a House of Bishops. So we gather, and the first night we got there, our delegation was set to meet in a room to get ready to prepare for our work. Martha, Martha, you're so distracted. And one of our delegation was running late, which isn't necessarily an unusual thing, but eventually she came in and she looked very serious. And she said, I'm really sorry I'm late. There was a person murdered right outside our hotel. And the police were very open about that's what they were doing, and they hoped that I would just walk around. Martha, Martha, you are distracted by so many things. So there we were, sitting around a table, and you know, that kind of sets the tone. It was hard to talk about some other things for a while. Kind of all sad in silence. It was a 48-year-old man that was killed in Baltimore. I will tell you, nothing against Baltimore. It's not about, I just realized coming home I like the country. You know, I was born in Maine, moved all the way to New Hampshire. But so we're right in the middle of the city, and in the middle of the city when the cars are stopped, there are these mostly young men that try to wash your windshield. They're called squeegee guys. And they do this to earn some pocket money, right? And they just come up to your car and they want to do this. Apparently, this 48-year-old man, for reasons that we don't know yet, as far as I know, got out of his car with a baseball bat and started chasing after these young kids. So as they started to disperse, this 15-year-old boy turned around and shot him 6 times. So we were distracted. Yet again, here we are sitting in the belly of the church, really. I mean, it can be, it can be an arduous process, but there are many holy moments. But we were distracted at the beginning, and we sat quietly. And our bishop, who is on the bishop's task force for gun violence, just started praying. We prayed for the young men that felt like that's what they needed to do for income. We prayed for, we did not know at that point that it was a 15-year-old boy that had shot this man. We prayed for the man that got out, and for whatever reason he thought he needed to get out of his car in downtown Baltimore with a baseball bat. We prayed. So we began our week a bit distracted. But the other thing that it did is we began our week in prayer. We began our week sitting together in silence, and in our bishop's leadership, we prayed. Martha, Martha, you're so distracted and worried about things. I don't believe Jesus is belittling Martha. I don't believe Jesus is saying her work and her ministry is not important. I don't believe that he's saying that. But Martha is really upset and worried. They were in dangerous times. We are living in dangerous times. If you look, which I didn't know, let me not take any credit for this, I just did my homework. If you look at the root for the word worry, it is strangle or seize by the throat and tear. How many of you worry? I know I do. But I never think about it as strangling or seizing by the throat and tearing. But given different situations at different times, I guess it feels like that. Martha, Martha, you worry. And then distraction. The root for the word distraction is a separation or a dragging apart of something that should be whole. We see that, don't we? We see that in the church. We see that in the world. Many of us see that in our families right now. We worry and are distracted and have trouble getting to the center. And yet sometimes, maybe if we can just imagine just stopping and being quiet, taking a breath, and if we're people of prayer, asking God for grace and hope. That first morning, we heard Bishop Curry preach, and you've heard me talk about him. I mean, I've had the lucky blessing of hearing him preach in person many times, but of course, because of COVID precautions, he was beamed in from the day before. But you know, that man can preach in a closet by himself. He does not need a congregation. He gets going, and you can tell he starts off slow. And then when he starts to go, you realize he doesn't even know where he is, and it doesn't matter. He told us that they had just finished a study and that they had found out that 84% of people across the spectrum that they interviewed said that this, not church people, this was not a survey done in the church, 84% of people thought that Jesus was an important spiritual figure and should probably be learned about and listened to. But then it gets interesting, right? Oh, Martha, Martha, you're so distracted. So then we go to 50% of people think Christians are hypocrites. Isn't that shocking? I feel so shocked and offended. 49% feel like we're incredibly judgmental. Another shocking point of interest. And 46% felt like we were selfish. Just a random sampling of people. That old song, it also says it in scripture, you know, they'll know we are Christians by our love. Not by our judgment, not by our rules, not by our litmus test, not by who we think is in or out, but by our love. The theme of his opening sermon really was, in my opinion, one of the things that I certainly enjoyed from it was he said, you know, maybe one of the biggest problems for the church is the enormous gap between Jesus and his followers. Let me say that again in case you didn't hear it. Maybe one of the biggest problems for the church is the gap between Jesus and his followers. This whole, fight in mainline Protestant traditions. The church is dying, the church is dying, the church is dying. My thing is, maybe we ought to just be the church and see what happens. But if everybody thinks we're hypocrites, judgmental, cold, and mean, I don't want to go there either. So Bishop Curry calls us, and he says to us over and over again, and I love this, he said, Jesus gave us the recipe for how to close the gap. Jesus told us how to close that gap. We just need to do it. And it's called the love commandment, right there on Monday, Thursday. Above all else, you love your neighbor as yourself. We love each other. We're called to love each other as Jesus loved us. Not as a particular thing that we've decided to stand for. We get to love one another. We get to listen to one another. We get to not assume we have all the answers. One of the most moving moments of General Convention for me was when a woman named Katie stood up. She was a woman that was a delegate from what used to be West Texas. North Texas, it used to be the Diocese of Fort Worth. And back when Gene Robinson was consecrated, that was the final straw. But in 2000, what is it? I've got it written here, and of course I can't see it. But 11 years ago, they decided that they were going to split off and become the Anglican Church because of the ordination of women and because of LGBTQ plus issues. And they were going to split off. So they split off and they went to the Anglican Church, and she stood up on this podium on 2022, asking for us to pass a resolution that would allow them to again become part of the Diocese of Texas. Bishop Andy Doyle had been working with them saying, we can do this. But she said, you know what happened? She said that the Texas Supreme Court, we lost all of our battles, so they took all of our land. She said they took all of our land, they took all of our churches. She said they took our chasubles and our chalices and our hats. They took everything. But she said they didn't take everything. She said the only thing that saved us, was that we went out into the streets and found a way to help people that needed to hear the loving, life-giving message of Jesus. And she said we didn't do it with a hammer, we didn't do it with a Bible, we didn't shove anything down anyone's throat. We just, love saved us. The whole place was crying at this point. She said they took everything, but they didn't. Because what saved us was finding people that needed to know the loving, life-giving spirit of Jesus. No matter who they were, no matter how they voted, no matter what their name was or who they lived with or who they loved. We just talked about Jesus. And when they didn't want to listen, she said, we just tried, we just went, okay, fine, take it all, then we're just going to act like Jesus. Because you know what? It frees us up. In their grief, what they could do was realize that their church was not their beloved chalices and their patents and their buildings. And please be clear, that started in 2001, and we are 2022. So let me not mislead you to think that this has been an easy, painless process. Bishop Andy Doyle is one of the, he's some of those rock stars of the Episcopal Church. He thinks he's very cool, and he is very cool. And he's done a great job. But he said, you know what? They may be tiny, but they're fierce. And we welcome them back. Oh, Martha, so worried and distracted by things. Sometimes we're worried and distracted by things that are real. by things that we love and that mean something to us, things and people and organizations, and certainly the church has broken many hearts. And Jesus says, okay, Martha, just chill for a minute, because what you're doing is really important. But how about you just take a break? How about you let me feed you for a little while? I remember one of my first years of ministry, I was in my last church, and these women, I love church women, right? And so they had been holding this place together forever, and so we were going to have their first retreat. Basically, it was a meeting, because retreat was a hard word. So we were going to have a meeting, and I told them to bring nothing. I am telling you, it didn't matter what we did all day. That was the intervention. They called me. They were mad. They were upset. They didn't know what to do. Well, they didn't know what to do. Then they couldn't believe I could cook, I was a little offended by, but how is it that we as the Episcopal Church can be both and? We would be nowhere without our Marthas, and we would be nowhere without our Marys. We would be nowhere without those of us among us, men and women alike, that can care for the other and that can listen to the other. We would be nowhere, whether it's the Episcopal Church or any other family of faith, if we couldn't listen to Jesus and find out that even when we love our things, it is love that will save our life. We found our way through all these resolutions and all these things, and I had more steps on my Fitbit than I've ever had in my life, because I managed to keep my mouth shut most of the time. I would like to say briefly that you folks have done an amazing job, both via technology and other ways. I found out I'd like to believe I don't take you for granted anyway, but I certainly don't take our walk through COVID together for granted, and I don't at all now. But what I know is that we hear the words of Jesus, and as I come back from what was something I wasn't really looking forward to be quite honest, because it seemed challenging, it was a blessing. It's a blessing to be part of this body of the church, because sometimes we have to do stuff in all of our jobs that isn't the most fun stuff. Right? And then in the midst of doing the administrative work, and I hope you all have this experience in your life, so you'll be going about doing your chores, maybe then there's a holy moment. And can we stop for the holy moment? Towards the end of the convention, this will shock none of you that know me, I was standing at the Starbucks on my way to the convention center, and I was standing in a long line. And it was wonderful because, I wasn't in charge of anything, and I had vowed that I was just going to be present, that I was going to do what I was called to do and try to pay attention. And so we were almost done, and we had been through all these things. There was I could take you hostage. So we'd been through all these things. And it's the last morning, and I'm standing there, and we're all in line, and there was this man in the line up front. As in many of our urban cities, here in Dover also, there was a man of color with a big plastic bag. He was in line with all the rest of us, got to the counter, and whatever he ordered, and then he got down, and he did like all of us, and he went and stood off to the side. Then I heard his name called. I don't even remember what his name was, but he went up, and they had made him a glass of water. They put it right on the counter, just like my $5 latte. He took his water, and he started to walk away. And then this young woman that's a barista who must know him because she must see him all the time. She said, "Sir, Just like she would say to you or I or anyone else that perhaps had the money to pay for one of our expensive drinks. She said, "Sir, sir, you forgot your sugar." He walked up to the counter and she gave him 4 packets of sugar to put in his water, and he thanked her. By God's grace, A, I noticed it, but B, I locked eyes with this young woman of color and just kind of nodded my head. And she and I both knew she had treated that man with dignity and respect. I don't know where he comes from. I don't know what he's got. I don't know where she comes from or what she's got. But they will know we are followers of Jesus by our love. Not by our judgment. Not by all of the stuff we carry around, because we all do. But a simple act of treating another human being with respect and kindness. That's who we are. Not getting out of a car with a baseball bat. This is the scripture reading that Gay Jennings, who was the president of the House of Deputies, asked us to pray with during this time. And I leave us with it this morning, Colossians 3:12 through 17. Therefore, as God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, meekness, and patience. Bear with one another, and if anyone has a complaint, shocking, right? If anyone has a complaint against another, forgive each other. Just as the Lord has forgiven you, so you also must forgive. Above all, clothe yourselves with love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony. And let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, to which indeed you are called in one body. And be thankful. Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly. Teach and admonish one another in all wisdom, and with gratitude in your heart sing psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs to God. And whatever you do, in word or deed, do everything in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him. Let it be so.